Hello and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Vaccines, They've Got to Be Used to Work, Lessons from the 2015 Measles Outbreak. If you have any questions about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and the email are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handouts are available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access that material. I'm Cindy Lessinger, Director of the Immunization Division at the Alabama Department of Public Health, and I would like to welcome our presenter today. Dr. David Kimberlin is the Sergio Staño Endowed Chair in Pediatric Infectious Diseases, Professor and Co-Division Director at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Children's of Alabama. Welcome, Dr. Kimberlin.
Cindy, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what are you're going to talk to us about measles today?
I'm going to talk about measles. The lead into it, though, is going to be a little bit broader than just that. Okay. It's going to include a discussion and a conversation of vaccine programs, the benefit of vaccine programs. I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, I think, on that. And then also explore some of the current phenomenon of vaccine hesitancy, vaccine deniers, the situation that pediatricians, family practice folks across the country face every single day in terms of folks that are in the public that are not receptive to these life-saving measures and life-saving medicines that we have available to us. So I appreciate very much the opportunity to talk with you all today, and welcome everybody from around the country who is listening in. I guess I should say good afternoon for most of us, but some over in the Mountain Time Zone or Pacific Time Zone, good morning. In terms of disclosures, I have no relationships with any pharmaceutical companies right now. I have, over the past 24 months, performed studies that are conducted by or paid for by Gilead and GSK, but all monies for this go directly to my university, University of Alabama at Birmingham, and not to me. None of them are vaccine related. The Gilead one is an RSV natural history study. The GSK was a treatment study using intravenous zanamivir. And I do intend to talk about unapproved or investigative use of commercial products. I put that on all of my talks simply because most products that are available for medical use are unapproved in children. And so I always have the real risk or real chance of talking about something that has not been approved, or at least approved at certain ages within the pediatric population. Now, the rationale for this talk is really illustrated on this slide and the subsequent slide. And I think for the people that are listening and the people in the audience here today, again, I don't think that this is a very controversial set of bullet points. Vaccines, I think, I would put the argument forth, and I believe that you would agree with me, and hopefully by the end of this talk, an hour or so from now, you definitely will agree with me. Vaccines are the most effective medical advance that we have ever had in the history of humanity. Yet, even with that, parents too frequently these days resist having their children vaccinated. They turn their backs on these life-saving measures. And this reality, this issue of vaccine hesitancy or people questioning the benefit or the need for vaccines is something that pediatricians experience every single day. So more importantly, though, not only is there an individual aspect or an individual outcome from that, but it also impacts everybody else. If I have high blood pressure and I don't take my high blood pressure medicine because I don't believe in high blood pressure medicine, I hurt myself. Because I have high blood pressure, I'll stroke and I'll be left with permanent impairment. On the other hand, if I don't get vaccinated and my child doesn't, and my child gets measles, for instance, or whooping cough, or you name it, any of the vaccine preventable diseases, then they not only are the ones that suffer, but then the people around them do as well. Our across the street neighbor who's elderly, or our up the hill neighbor whose child has cancer, whatever it may be, it puts everyone else at risk too. So it's not simply my choice as a parent or as a person whether to accept or refuse immunization. What I choose directly impacts the totality of people around us. We live in a society. Society means we're interconnected. Part of that comes with responsibility. And I would posit, and I hope we'll make the point over the next bit, that part of that responsibility is really addressed by doing the right thing with respect to preventing life-threatening diseases. Now, at the end of the 20th century, the end of the 1900s, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention published in one of the MMWRs a listing of the top 10 medical advances over the course of that century. And that was a century, remember that, we started with a life expectancy of 55, 60 years. We ended with a life expectancy of 80 plus years. It was a phenomenally successful century in terms of advances in medical care and advances in terms of health of the public. So the things that are on this list and on the subsequent slide are not surprising. Safer and healthier foods, family planning, being able to choose when you have a pregnancy or not have a pregnancy, fluoridation of drinking water in terms of dental hygiene and so forth, use of tobacco, recognition of use of tobacco as a carcinogen, for instance, that it can do harm and cause cancer and cause problems with emphysema and so forth later on. In addition, declines in death from coronary artery disease or stroke, control of infectious diseases, safer workplaces, motor vehicle safety, simply knowing that you need to wear your seatbelt and that can save lives, or that airbags can save lives, and making cars that crumple. All of those things, tremendous advances. But topping this list is vaccination, recognized at the end of the last century as the most important medical advance during a century in which the medical advances and the safety advances were substantial. So if you think back to the beginning of the 20th century, so my grandparents were born in the very end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. So basically for their generation, when they were born, at that point in time, infectious diseases were the most serious threat to human life and to human well-being. For every 100 children that were born around 1900, 1905, for every 100 children born, 16 would die before they were 5 years of age from an infectious disease. So if you think about it, most families back then were 7, 8, 9, 10 children. They didn't have family planning. They had larger families. They needed larger families to work in the fields and do other things too. I mean, it was part of the societal structure. So if you end up with 7, 8, or 9 children, and there's a 16% chance that your child will die before they're 5 years of age, most families, most parents, a mere 100 years ago, buried a child from what is now a vaccine-preventable disease. It's incomprehensible. We don't deal with that today. Thank God we don't deal with that today. And the reason we don't deal with it is because of the advances in vaccinology. So it should be a very kind of no-brainer situation that everyone would recognize this benefit. Too often that's not the case. Stated another way, if you look at the numbers of lives that were saved from vaccination, in other words, if we had not had vaccination, how many people would have died during the course of the 20th century from a vaccine-preventable disease? It's estimated that 300 million people would have died if they had not been vaccinated. They would have died of what is, in fact, a vaccine-preventable disease in that hypothetical. So that's a lot of people. Now, also during the 20th century, we got better at and more efficient at killing each other than we've ever been before. We're very good at killing each other in very large numbers. We can kill tons of people at once. So if you add up all of the deaths occurring during armed conflict, during wars of the 20th century, 160 million people were killed in all wars combined. That means that about twice as many lives were saved from vaccines as were lost in warfare during the 20th century. That statistic for me resonates substantially with just how important these advances really are, just how many lives are impacted from this. Now, this is a slide I hope projects well on the television screens if you're watching this remotely. It's a reproduction of a composite table that is pulled from a number of different sources, CDC as well as a couple of textbooks, that lists in the left-hand column the diseases that are vaccine preventable, or most of the diseases that are vaccine preventable. And in the column that's second from the left, it shows at the peak of the incidence of those diseases during the 20th century, how many patients, how many people had morbidity associated with that infectious disease. So about 29,000 people had morbidity from smallpox at the peak. 530,000 had morbidity from measles at its peak. And then in the column next to that, the number of reported cases in 2013 and the percent decline. And it is just a remarkable, remarkable statistic. The outlier here clearly is pertussis. That is a challenge, first of all, because it's a mucosal disease, and making a mucosal vaccine or a vaccine that can prevent mucosal infections is challenging. In addition, honestly, probably the acellular pertussis vaccine just is not as good as the wholesale pertussis vaccine was. So while we moved away from the wholesale pertussis vaccine to try to get away from some of the side effects, part of those side effects were because it was a very reactogenic, very immunogenic vaccine. So we gave up something when we moved to an acellular vaccine. I'm not sure exactly how we move forward with that, other than the targeted use of Tdap in pregnancy and so forth. Ultimately, I think we probably are going to need a better vaccine for pertussis. That's unique compared with the rest of this list. The rest of the list, we've got great vaccines. We've got vaccines that have taken the disease incidence down by 99 to 100%, as you can see in that particular slide. Now, that celebrates our victories. How about our ongoing risks? This is a website called the Council on Foreign Relations. I accessed it a week ago on May 14th, 2015. And what is represented on this slide is a map of the world with each circle representing a disease that is vaccine preventable, representing an outbreak from that disease. So you see a lot of measles, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia as well. You see circles in the United States from mumps and from measles and from pertussis and other things. The idea here is to give a visual that recognizes that these diseases are out there. And they're out there not only still in the United States, although to a much lesser extent than certainly 50 years ago, but they are equally out there, if not more out there, in other parts of the world. Now, if you can, keep this image in your mind, and this, from the same day at 3:54 p.m., represents every airplane in the world and where they are. Same date, late afternoon, Central Time. These are the planes. And you can see planes in orange coming to and from the United States. Every one of these diseases is 18 hours away or less from us right now. Somebody could be connecting through to go down to southern Florida on a vacation, connecting through Atlanta, and somebody's coming in from Switzerland and connecting through Atlanta, or connecting through DFW, or connecting through LAX. Any disease, except for smallpox, which has been eliminated, any other vaccine-preventable disease is a mere 18 hours or less from us right now. In 2012, I believe there were 3 cases of congenital rubella syndrome. 3 cases in the entire country. I'd never seen congenital rubella syndrome. One of those 3 was in Birmingham, Alabama. A woman from Africa who was here visiting friends and family and went into labor and delivered prematurely and had a baby with congenital rubella syndrome that ultimately did not survive. During that time, she was at a community hospital, and before they realized what was wrong with the baby, they knew that something wasn't right. They were doing the diagnostic evaluation. They were letting the baby room in with the mom, and the nurse taking care of the mom didn't realize it was rubella, right? Because no one did at that point, and that nurse was pregnant. And they tested the nurse, and she was rubella non-immune. So these lives, she fortunately did not contract rubella. But these lives, these women's lives, started on different continents, different parts of the world, joyful moments. You know, they're adding to their families. This, I mean, what's more human than that? And yet they were destined to intersect in Birmingham, Alabama, on a floor, postpartum floor, in a community hospital. They were destined to intersect. You never know. Let me just back out for a sec. For the folks in the audience here and those that are tied in too, I can't see obviously your hands, but raise your hand if you buckle up every time you get in your car to drive somewhere. And for the record, all the hands are raised. Now, raise your hand if you've been in a car wreck in the last year. 2 hands are raised. So everyone else in the audience, why'd you buckle up? You weren't in a wreck. You didn't need to do that. What a waste of time, right? You were constrained there in your car. Why'd you do it?
Just in case.
Just in case. You don't know if you're going to be in that wreck. You don't know if that person's flying through Atlanta today. You don't know. You don't wait till the 18-wheeler is bearing down on you to buckle up. You do it before you start moving the car. The only way, and it's kind of a glib title to the talk, but the only way vaccines can work is if they're used. We've got to have people realize that. We've got to have people embrace what vaccines can do. And we've got to find, honestly, I have to find a better way of communicating it to make sure that we reach as many people as possible. There will be some folks, and we'll see some slides about this, there'll be some folks that we can't reach. There'll be some folks that are the fringe, that are the extreme minority. But they're not really who we have to reach. The people we really have to reach are the folks that want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing, but they're confused. They're confused by the noise, the dirt, the dust that's kicked up by the very vocal, extremely small number of vaccine deniers. And so that it's a lot of social science that goes into that. And I'm not a social scientist, so I can talk about the diseases and try to get people passionate about it, but we really need smart people that can understand and develop methodologies by which communication can be most effective with parents that understandably want to make sure they're not harming their children. I get that. We've got to make sure they realize that the right thing to do, the safest thing to do, is to embrace the vaccines that will save their children's lives. Because this slide illustrates how close all of us are in this world. So let me back out for just a minute and talk a little bit. This is, for the most part, a public health group. So much of what I'm going to say is already known to you. But there are two main groups that are involved with vaccine policy development. In other words, deciding which children, in this case, in my case, in some pediatric infectious disease, which children should be immunized with which vaccines and what schedule that should be. The first is the American Academy of Pediatrics. On this slide, the AAP, the Committee on Infectious Diseases. This is called the Red Book Committee. And it consists of 13 voting members, 12 are committee members, and one is a section on infectious disease member of the Academy. All of them voting. There are 4 ex officio members. I was a voting member from, I think, 2005 to 2011. And then I've been either associate editor or now the editor of the Red Book for these cycles since then, and will continue to be for the 2018 edition, along with Mike Brady in Ohio, Marianne Jackson in Kansas City, and Sarah Long in Philadelphia. They're the associate editors. Now, there are also a number of liaisons to the Red Book Committee. And they're all equally important. I do want to emphasize the second bullet down, or second hash line down here, is the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has 2 liaisons. And this is really important because if you back it up 20 years or 25 years, there were 2 different vaccine schedules. There was the AAP schedule and there was the CDC schedule. And what Larry Pickering and others have done so beautifully over so many years is really work very hard to have the AAP and the CDC work in lockstep with each other so that we don't have 2 separate schedules. We have one schedule that pediatricians and family practice folks and OBs can know to go to and know what to do for their particular patients. Having the CDC embedded with the AAP, and then, as you'll see, the AAP embedded with the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices goes a long, long way to making that a reality, to maintaining that reality that people before us built so hard and spent so much time creating. Canadian Pediatric Society, the National Vaccine Program, NIH is there, FDA is there, COPAM, which is the Committee on Practice folks, private pediatricians in other words, Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the ATS. So all of these folks gather about 2 times a year, and they discuss in the fall and in the spring what the main issues are. And these are not just issues that are vaccine topics and vaccine schedule issues. There's bigger things than that too. A head lice statement that just came out, for instance, about how to diagnose and treat head lice. But for the purposes of this talk, it really is the vaccine issues that I think are most relevant. The committee members stay on the committee for 6 years and then rotate off, and they're selected by expertise and by geography. And then as I alluded to, they are also liaisons back to the ACIP, and they're embedded in the work groups of the ACIP to make sure that we have good communication, good crosstalk, if you will, between the two organizations. Now, the Red Book is published every 3 years. The 2015 edition was just released about 3 weeks ago now, just before the PASSPR meeting out in San Diego. And then immediately we had a call yesterday to talk about how do we start planning for the 2018 edition. This is something that is a work that is always rolling through, and I think that makes it a stronger thing. With the 2015 Red Book, for instance, 1,000 hands touch those documents. This is groupthink at its best way. This is settled science that is decided upon either because the data are there, that makes it pretty easy, and then those situations where the data are not there, for instance, you've got 2 different vaccines for the same disease, but they're not, their indications are slightly different, the timing of administration. For instance, CDC and AAP will get together and harmonize that if possible, and some of that's expert judgment. Some of that is not going to be where you can go pull the paper and see exactly what it is that you need to do. Now, I wished I'd remembered to bring a prop. I have 2 props that I like to show. One is the original 1938 Red Book. And imagine me holding up a little bulletin that's 8 pages long. 8 pages. Has 18 different diseases, those that are listed on this slide. And before I move to the next slide to show the remainder of the diseases, those that are in yellow font on this slide are those that are vaccine preventable now. And those that are in white font are no longer, or have not been vaccine preventable. So 13 of the 18 diseases that were the major diseases of the time back in 1938 and therefore included in the Red Book, the very first edition of the Red Book, are now diseases that we see rarely, if at all, because of the power of vaccines. Now, the new edition that just came out, if I had that prop as well, it's substantially longer. It's 150 times longer than the 8 pages. It's 1,200 pages. Weighs 5 pounds. There's a lot of information in there. I think probably with the 2018 edition, we need to do a better job of slimming down some of the chapters. But you can still pick it up and find what you need, find it quickly, because of predecessors before us that really developed and fine-tuned the layout of this. I recommend all of y'all in around the country and in your offices to have access to this, either in the hard copy or the Red Book online editions, because they're the same. Now, shifting focus and talking about the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or the ACIP. This was established back in 1964 by the Surgeon General. It is charged with providing expert advice to the CDC director on use of vaccines in the civilian population. The DoD has its own policies and procedures by which vaccine schedules are determined for people in the military. But in the civilian world, it's the ACIP that's involved with this. And they develop written policy recommendations for the FDA licensed vaccines and related biologics, and they take those when they're developing them by evaluating disease burden, vaccine safety and efficacy or effectiveness if known, and cost effectiveness. The cost effectiveness piece of this is probably, it's the newest to the table, and it's probably the least precise. As you all know, when you look at cost effectiveness data, it depends what you put into it in terms of what you get out of it. The CDC folks are phenomenal at what they do in terms of working through what goes in. So the model, building the model is at least for me, what I see when I look at those CDC data, they are robust. What we need more of, and this is a societal issue, we need more of a debate and a discussion about what we're willing to pay for. What of the qualities, the quality adjusted life years, how much do we want to pay per quality gained as a society? That's not for us in the medical field to decide. We can contribute to that, but that's a societal issue, and we need society to have those discussions and not get sidetracked with noise about death panels and so forth and killing grandmothers. We're talking about real issues here. We've got a very large amount of money, but a finite amount of money in front of us. How do we want to spend that? Now, I would suggest that vaccines are a great way to spend it, because you end up saving a life that's productive for years and years and years to come. But there are some vaccines that are very expensive if you use them in certain populations. And that's a debate and a discussion we've got to have. It's beyond the scope of this conversation, but ACIP is as deep in the weeds as any group is, and I commend them for that. There are 15 voting members, and they are adult ID, they're pediatric ID, they're general pediatric folks, they're family practice folks, they're OBs. It's the whole gamut. There are ex officio members as well, and then liaison organizations, and those liaison organizations are listed on this and subsequent slides. I've been able, I guess for the last maybe 7 or 8 years, to be one of the AAP liaisons, and so I sit at one of the outer tables and really learn a ton just by listening to the really robust and detailed discussions and debates that happen within the inner table. And you can see the other groups and societies, including the Infectious Disease Society of America and the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, that have liaisons to the ACIP. And that would include as well the Pediatric Nurse Practitioners organization known as NAPNAP, and pharmaceutical companies as well. So once, I guess, I'll say again, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that's what the acronym stands for. The first word I said was advisory. They provide advice. They don't set policy. They advise the director on what the policy should be, and ultimately the director makes the decision as to whether to accept those recommendations or not. They are initially preliminary or provisional, and then once accepted by the CDC director, they become permanent or official recommendations, and they're published subsequently in the MMWR. So that's the breadth of oversight that goes into developing recommendations on use of vaccines. This is not 3 people sitting in a back room. This is not somebody with a pharmaceutical company that can make money off of it sitting at the table. These are professionals that are charged by CDC and the AAP to evaluate data and make hard decisions. And they have no vested interest in the outcome other than the health of the children of the United States of America, which is a good vested interest for them to have. So why doesn't this work in such a way that we have complete uptake or complete acceptance of vaccines? It's been well recognized now for, and I'll show you a graphic of this here in just a minute, for many years, what happens when a successful vaccine program is introduced. First of all, you've got a vaccine preventable disease. Let's think back, to the 1950s with polio as an example. In 1954, parents were afraid to take their children to the swimming pools, the neighborhood swimming pools, because they were afraid their children would contract polio. There was a huge fear in the country, rightly so, a fear of paralytic polio disease. There were the pictures of the iron lungs and children that would remain in those iron lungs for the rest of their lives. And parents were frantic to do anything they could to make sure that their child was not one of those children. So during that time, there were vaccines that were developed. And interestingly, with the first large vaccine testing study that was done with polio, parents would line up, blocks deep to get their child vaccinated. Even when the Cutter incident occurred and there was a problem with an incompletely attenuated polio virus, and there was some problems from that and some paralytic polio as a consequence, even that did not shake public confidence because people realized how bad the disease was. They knew why they needed to get their child vaccinated. Over time, though, as the vaccine uptake increases, if it's a good vaccine, disease decreases, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose. And so you end up with parents that likely never have seen the disease. They only see the vaccine. They only see their child getting numerous shots. They wonder why that's important, why that's a necessary thing. They may see some side effects. Every medicine or everything in the world can have side effects. I have a glass of water here to my immediate left. You're right. If I drank 1,000 times that amount of water, I would be seizing on the floor because my sodium would drop to 115 and I could die from that. Water can kill me. Drinking water can kill me. It also can keep me alive if I don't get dehydrated. So that same kind of risk-benefit of any product, including vaccines that will have some side effects. But it's important, it's imperative that we all recognize, number one, that we constantly are assessing, and CDC and AAP are constantly assessing for what those side effects are in the real world. And that for every vaccine out there so far, the risks of not getting vaccinated, the risks of disease, in other words, of that plane coming in to Atlanta's airport right now with the disease on it, that those risks far outweigh the mild side effects or even the moderate side effects that a few vaccines can have. But that balance is what gets kind of off when you don't see the disease. And especially you add to that the social media and the regular media attention as well, and parents understandably can get confused. And over time, there can be loss of public confidence, and that's illustrated here on this slide. The disease is in red, the vaccine coverage is in bright green. You can see as vaccine coverage goes up, the disease incidence goes down. Adverse events gradually go up because you're using more of the vaccine, and every medicine that there is has some adverse events. So adverse events go up, and eventually there gets to be some sort of a breaking point at which people say, hey, I don't know about that vaccine. I'm not going to get that. Not enough people get the vaccine. And that may not be just within a state or just within a city. It could be within a neighborhood. And we'll circle back to that when we talk about measles, because there were pockets of relatively large percentages of undervaccinated or unvaccinated people against measles. And that's where, when the match was thrown onto it, that's where the grass was dry enough for the fire to catch and then ultimately spread out to the rest of us as well. So it doesn't have to be just a general loss of confidence. It can be within microcosms, micro areas that lead to putting us all at risk. So what happens when you drop your vaccine coverage? Disease comes back. It's pathetically predictable. Pathetically predictable. And I mean pathetic because children die when they don't have to. What could be more pathetic than that? All because people don't realize the importance. And the burden is on us to do a better job, a more effective job of explaining why they need to maintain that confidence in vaccines. They need to get the vaccines because, as the talk says, if you don't use it, you can't get the benefits from it. Now, this is not something that's new. People have been looking at this for some time. And again, I confess, I'm not a social scientist, but this is a study that was published in 1999 that I just excerpted about three bullets from CDC, from a CDC-funded study. And it looked at people, and this is interesting to me, people's different risk perceptions. So let me just say, last summer, my family took a trip to Wyoming. It was a wonderful trip. And we were at the Grand Teton National Park, and my wife and my 3 children went to the top of a mountain and jumped off with a paraglider. I didn't do that. My perception of risk is different than a 15-year-old boy's, and apparently my 40-some-odd-year-old wife, too. So because she jumped right off, and they had a wonderful time. I stayed up firmly on the ground and videotaped from the ground, and I had a good time doing that. Everyone views risk differently. And so there's different reasons that are outlined here. Voluntary risks, generally speaking, are more acceptable to people than involuntary risks. My risk perception is different than yours may be or yours may be. The third point, I think, is one that I kind of understand a little bit. Many people prefer the consequences of inaction to the consequences of action. And rightly or wrongly, giving a vaccine is an action. You're physically holding a child, you're physically putting a needle through the skin, you're giving a vaccine. And confessional time, I understand as the dad who held my daughters and my son down when they were babies and they were getting the vaccines, I had that little twinge. What if? Am I doing the right thing? I knew I was. It didn't stay with me long. But if I'm having that question, I can only imagine at least some other parents do too. We need to acknowledge that. We need to recognize that. We need to counter it too. We need to say, look, the risk, you're given a shot or spraying something up the nose, but the risk of not doing that, that's where the real risk is. That's where your child could be paralyzed. That's where your child could be brain damaged. That's where your child could be deaf. That's where your child could be dead. That's what we have to prevent. And we need to take it head on, and we need to make sure they realize that we mean it. And that we want that for our own children. And if I don't want for my patient's child the same thing that I want for my own children, then they don't need me as their doctor. Because if it's good enough for my child, it's good enough for every other child in this country. Now let's go back to the 1700s. Benjamin Franklin has this quote that's projected on your screen. And I'm going to read through it, and it's going to have some, the language was a little bit different back then, so there's going to be some oddities to the way that it sounds, but let's just read through this. In 1736, I lost one of my sons, a fine boy of 4 years old, by the smallpox taken in the common way, in other words, getting natural smallpox disease. I long regretted bitterly, and still regret, that I had not given it to him by inoculation, that is, the scarification, the vaccine. This I mention for the sake of parents who omit that operation on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under. My example showing that the regret may be the same either way, and that therefore the safer should be chosen. So it was 1736. Now, when they were figuring out about smallpox vaccine, it's for cowpox, so it's originally from, they recognized that milkmaids didn't get smallpox, then they realized that because they were infected with a related virus, cowpox, so they started the scarification with the inoculation, if you will, with cowpox. And so there was a lot of uproar about that. And there was a cartoon, for instance, published in 1802 that is whipping up hysteria about using this smallpox vaccine. And you can see a woman in the middle who's getting the scarification vaccination on her arm, or her right arm. And you can see other people around her have had that, and they're turning into cows, and they've got cows coming out of their ears and their mouths, and they've got horns on their head, and this is sort of the way to get people scared and not want to get vaccinated against smallpox. And we kind of shake our heads and we go, well, how silly is that? How stupid do they have to have been to have been swayed by that? Now, I would suggest that while our means have changed, the message has not. There are, and I'm not going to say who has horns in this picture, but there are people who have their own agendas. And they believe it. I don't doubt that they believe what they're saying. They're wrong, but they believe it. And they're very effective at creating the noise, creating the anxiety, kicking up the dust, like Pigpen in the old Charlie Brown cartoons. Kicking up the dust and making it hard to see what's going on around you. They've gotten much better at it, much more sophisticated. Now with social media, it's even worse. So it's a constantly changing situation. Now, a number of years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, I was asked to give a talk similar to this at the Infectious Disease Society of America meeting, and they charged me with the talk is an interesting title, The Epidemiology of Vaccine Refusal. And I liked it because there's an epidemiology of a disease, right? Well, maybe if we started thinking about this almost as a disease, as an entity that is not in the public's best interest. And so I didn't get very far, and I'll show you my summation on the next couple of slides. But I started by asking, I'm talking to public health people, so y'all already know all this, but what does epidemiology mean? Well, if you break it down into the Greek, it basically is the study of the patterns, causes, and effects of health and disease conditions in a defined population. So there might be a way to think about vaccine hesitancy, vaccine refusal in this continuum. My thought then on was sort of, all right, let's think about that root cause. What is the reason that this is happening? What's the epidemiology of this? And it's very crude compared with what you all know. But first I thought, all right, well, maybe parents don't care. Maybe they just don't care. And that's not it, obviously. Parents today love their children every bit as much as parents of 50 years ago, 150 years ago, 1,000 years ago. That is built into our DNA. That is who we are. That is our species. And so I rejected that right away. Parents care. Every parent loves their child. Every parent loves their child. Maybe they're ignorant about the risks of not vaccinating. Yeah, maybe. We talked about the very success of vaccine programs, eliminating the diseases and therefore eliminating the public's opportunity to see how bad those diseases are. That's possible. Lack of trust. I think that's definitely part of it. I don't know the reason for this. I do know that it's not just medicine. It is every facet of our society. And arguably every facet of the world society right now is distrustful. We don't trust anybody. We don't trust the government. We don't trust, the church. We don't trust doctors. We don't trust anybody. We don't trust teachers. We don't trust pharma. We don't trust anybody for anything. And I don't know why that is. It worries me because you got to trust somebody. I can't be an expert in everything. At some point I'll either die of the anxiety of it or I'm gonna trust somebody, right? But I would rather that parents trust the people that actually know something about it than their across the street neighbor who said, "Oh, I did such and such." And the parent goes, "Oh, okay, that sounds good. I'll do that too." That doesn't make sense. The other thing where I need to do better is to learn to be more effective with how I communicate. Because you can tell, I hope anyway, you can tell I'm passionate about this. I feel strongly about this. My children are 15, 14, and 12. And they could have died before if they had not been vaccinated and if the other parents around my neighborhood had not done the right thing. They could be dead from a vaccine preventable disease. And they are precious to me, precious. So during the 2009 influenza pandemic, I was on one of the local TV stations a fair number of times. And that was, if you think back to that was a fascinating pandemic because we number one, we had a drug to treat pandemic influenza. That was the first time we'd ever had a drug that was effective and in real time. And we developed the vaccine to prevent it too. So we had a quiver full of arrows ready to be used to prevent the influenza pandemic from spreading or getting worse, or at least if it was going to spread, to hopefully save some lives and improve outcomes for children and adults who were so afflicted. And so on one of these, it's embarrassing, one of these TV interviews, at that point there had been 49 children who had died from pandemic flu. And I said, we had the vaccine, and I said to the camera, I looked in the camera and I said, and if you want your child to be number 50, then don't get the vaccine. Felt really good to say it. It did no good whatsoever. It was crass and it was inconsiderate and it was the wrong. And no one told me that, but I mean afterwards I just cringe when I think about that. It felt good at the time, but it wasn't the right message. It wasn't the right message. I was trying to shake them up, but I don't think it worked. Now you may remember, the folks in Alabama that are listening to this, y'all may remember an incredibly effective public service announcement that was, and y'all might have done it. It might have been filmed in this very studio, with the weightlifting coach for the University of Alabama football team. And it was like the camera was in the audience, and it was like a football player watching him, and he's going, and this guy that at the beginning of the fourth quarter goes, yeah, I mean, this is our house, he's an incredibly powerful guy. And so he said, you will get your vaccine, you will be vaccinated against influenza. God never probably even heard what influenza was. He doesn't know a virus from a bacteria. But people trust the weightlifting coach at the University of Alabama football team. They don't trust me, they trust him. And the public service folks realized that, and they took someone that was trustworthy, and they put him in a position, and thank God he did it. He made a difference. He made a difference. He saved lives. I didn't. He did. So we need to figure that out better. We need to be better at it. I need to get better at my message. But even then, there are going to be other people that are more effective than any of us. We need to find out how to get those people. And we need to figure out how to use them and have them be part of the answer so that we diminish the number of people that are part of the problem. So what's the root cause here? I think it's fear. I think we're afraid of everything now. And I don't know why. But I can't think of any more fearful time in our country's history than right now. Any more fearful time. And ultimately we got to get through this, and we got to do it together. I come back, we are a society. It is not just me. It is not just me. And thank God it's not. How boring would that be just to be in your own little island? It's the connectedness. That's why we're here. That's why God put us here, is to relate to one another. And we got to figure out how to do it in a way that we take this fear down. So when we think about doing that with vaccines, unfortunately it's kind of like whack-a-mole. You knock one thing down and three more things pop up. And that seems to be the pattern. That seems to be the game here. There are four things that are outlined here. I'm going to go through just very briefly a few little quips about each of them. that right now get some attention from the standpoint of parents. This is what I'm worried about. One is that there are too many vaccines and there are too many vaccine antigens or proteins on this, that are part of the vaccine. Well, if you look at the schedule in 1983, this was it. We could prevent diphtheria, we could prevent tetanus, we could prevent pertussis, polio, and measles, mumps, and rubella. This is 2014, 2015. It is more complicated. There are more vaccines. I would suggest that's a good thing because there's more diseases we can prevent and therefore more people that will live long and healthy lives. But there are more. I will grant you that. But let's look at the number of antigens. In the left-hand column here is 1900, and you can see that at that point we had smallpox. And the smallpox, and I can't see the number down there, I think it's about 200 antigens in the smallpox vaccine. And then you go to 1960 and the 1980s and the around 2000s and the 2010s, and you can see the increase in the number of vaccines that are used, the diseases that can be prevented by vaccines or vaccination. And you see the number of antigens. And in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, we had 3,000 plus antigens. And that's in all vaccines cumulative over the course of 18 years. So the entirety of one's childhood years and adolescent years, all of the vaccine antigens used adds up to 3,200 or 3,000 or so. Now, I'll pause as well and say that that's a lot less than the number of antigens you're exposed to with one cold. With one cold, you get more viral antigens than you get in 18 years of vaccination back in the 1980s. But nevertheless, let's say that people have a concern about that. So you look at the most recent, and we're down now at about 125 to 150 antigens, even though we have all those more vaccines. That's where vaccinology technology has advanced to such a remarkable degree. So we are giving fewer antigens right now than we did 115 years ago. A lot fewer than 30 years ago. And children aren't dying of colds, right? So if your body can handle 30,000 antigens from a cold virus, it probably can handle 125 spread out over 18 years. I think you're okay with that. Giving vaccines too early in infancy. That's one of the other concerns. Well, I've alluded to this a little bit. The moment a baby passes out into this world, he or she is immediately colonized with bacteria and with viruses. And so if we had a problem with our immune systems, our innate immune system and our acquired immune system acquired from mom during the last part of pregnancy, if we had a problem with that, we wouldn't be here as a species. Our babies would have all died millions of years ago and we wouldn't have survived. So the immune system can handle this. This is not something, this is a pebble in an ocean in terms of what the ocean being your body's immune system and the capability of it to absorb the ripples. The pebble isn't going to create any kind of ripples that's going to be a problem. We do not have a problem with giving too many vaccines too early. And yet some people are saying that we still need to spread vaccines out. And there are some very influential, even people that are doctors, that are advocating this, and I would say making a lot of money selling books doing so. And this is Dr. Bob's alternative schedule. You can see that the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine isn't given until 3 months of age, and basically you bring them back every month for the first 7 months and then a couple more times. And that's easy to do, right? Patients always come back for follow-up, don't they? Really? I'm seeing some head shaking. No, I'm shocked. So of course that's hard to do. And even if a parent did it, what if your child got pneumococcal disease when they're 2.5 months old? And you're sitting there waiting, you got a vaccine that has been proven to be safe, it's been proven to be effective when given as per the schedule, and you're deliberately waiting for no benefit at all. All you're doing is putting your child at risk of death for that window of time. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that. There's no science behind this. The science actually goes against this, and the Institute of Medicine has firmly come out in that regard. It says that there is no alternative vaccine schedule, and I don't even like that phrase. There's no alternative vaccine schedule that's been evaluated to be safe or effective. Stick with what has been. Stick with the real schedule. So, interestingly, 13% in a survey, 13% of responders said, yeah, we've used alternative schedules. 53% refused certain vaccines, 55% delayed vaccines until the child was older. 17% of the responders refused all, 13% of the 17% of the 13% refused all vaccines, and that was about 2% of the total. And then if you look even at those that did the right thing, that got the vaccines the way they were supposed to, so these are the folks that do the right thing, 28% of them thought an alternative schedule was safer than the recommended schedule. These are the people that did the right thing. 22% disagreed with the statement that the best vaccination schedule was the one recommended by vaccine experts. Because they're experts. You can't trust an expert, right? I don't know why, but you can't. There is harm in doing this. It's not scientifically based. It's not evidence-based. It is more likely to induce needle phobia because you're dragging them back every week or every month, rather, to get another shot. It increases, this is my main beef, it increases the time during which the child is susceptible to a vaccine preventable disease. There's just no reason for that. And I would suggest not only for this, but for all vaccine hesitant parents, they are putting other children at risk. You know, measles, for instance, as we'll talk about in just a few minutes, the measles outbreak has been going for some time in Europe. Thousands and thousands of cases in France, cases in Switzerland. There was an outbreak in San Diego a couple of years back where a family did not believe in vaccinations. They believed in European vacations, but they didn't believe in vaccinations. So they went to Switzerland and they brought measles back. And the child, this 7-year-old or whatever, broke out with a measles rash. They went and sat in their doctor's office. And they exposed other people in that waiting room to measles, including children who were under a year of age and therefore could not get the measles vaccine. That's not right. That's not acceptable. Can't do that. You know, you can make your own choices. I could argue and say that's the wrong choice, but I don't think we have the right to put other people's children at risk. And there's just simply no benefit for doing so. So finally, there are bad things in vaccines, and those bad things are ill-defined. Right now, aluminum is one of them. And so here's a quote from the vaccine book from Dr. Sears. The alternative schedule suggests only one aluminum-containing vaccine at a time in infant years. And I'll say that aluminum is a stabilizer in vaccines, as you guys know. By spreading out the shots, you spread out the exposure so infants can process the aluminum without it reaching toxic levels. Sounds pretty good, right? Who wants toxic levels of aluminum in children? You know, probably no hands going up in this room and none over the internet or the webcast. But the issue is, we don't get toxic levels of aluminum in our bodies from vaccines. Aluminum is the third most abundant element on the surface of the planet. It's the most abundant metal. It's in the air we breathe. It's in the water we drink. It's in the food we eat. And if you look at it, it's found in breast milk as well as infant formulas. So I show by 6 months of age on this slide, a person will get 4 milligrams of aluminum through vaccines. They'll get 10 milligrams of aluminum from breast milk, 30 milligrams of aluminum in a milk-based formula, and 120 milligrams of aluminum in a soy-based formula. So let's take the logic all the way down to conclusion. If you'd want to limit the amount of aluminum in a child's body, you don't feed them. And then they won't get aluminum toxic. And by the way, none of these levels will get you aluminum toxic. None of them. I mean, this is just nonsense. It's just noise. It sells books, but it's noise. So there have been some studies that have looked at how to deal with this, and the science is not anywhere near settled on this. But thankfully, there's some really good folks looking into it with state grants and with federal CDC grants as well. And one of them was a small group, kind of an interface with parents. And you can see that the adjusted odds ratio of 1, if you cross 1, that means you're not statistically significantly different. The only thing that actually improved some sort of an outcome, some sort of a likelihood, was if you corrected misinformation about autism and the now completely debunked link of autism with vaccines. If you correct that information, and parents acknowledge that yes, autism is not caused by vaccines, then they're less likely to get vaccinated. I didn't misstate that. They're less likely to get vaccinated. Bass backwards. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. But that's what the data showed. So simply giving information is probably not enough. Additionally, one of the other things that did not provide any statistically significant benefit was using, kind of bad case scenarios, showing pictures of children in wheelchairs or seizures or whatever it might be. So we got to find this better way. I don't know what it is. There also is a Heuristic Psychology. Gave a talk early last year, I think, at Samford University in Birmingham about the ethics of vaccine refusal. And I learned about Heuristic Psychology. Don't know much about it beyond just sort of this graphic. But essentially it kind of makes sense. It's the idea that one processes facts predicated upon one's beliefs. So if I have a certain belief system and you have a different belief system and we're presented with the same facts, we're going to interpret those facts differently because we start out from different places. So you can see if the fact fits the opening of my belief system, that fact will get through to my brain, to use this kind of cartoon graphic. If it is completely inconsistent, it's a square and the way into my brain is a circle, it ain't getting in. I'm going to reject that fact. Even though it's a fact, I'll reject it because I don't understand it. I can't process it. On the other hand, if we can take the facts and we can shape them to be where people with different belief systems can receive different messages and we stay true to the fact of that message, that can be an answer for us here. Now, unfortunately, we're not there yet. There are many people whose belief systems do not allow understanding of the facts of measles. These are children with measles. The lower left is Koplik spots inside the mouth. The rest are obviously the trunk of a child and the face of a child. I remember when I was interviewing for internship in '88, I went through Ben Taub in Houston. That was right at the beginning of the '89 to '91 or so measles outbreak. And the children were lining the hallway leading into, literally lining the hallway leading into the emergency room because there were so many of them. And they all look just like those two children who we see the faces of on this particular slide. When you see it, you know it. If you've seen a child with measles and you see another child, you go, that child has measles. I mean, it's that kind of vivid in terms of the capacity. And why we care about it is because of well, number one, it's about the most infectious disease that there is. There was a case at a large football stadium, a professional football game in a domed stadium, and somebody down on the lower level had measles, and there were two susceptible people up in the nosebleed section in the upper deck who were measles susceptible. They got measles because somebody down, you've been in those stadiums, way down there had measles. That it hangs in the air for hours. It is a incredibly infectious disease, and then it causes complications. So about 1 in 1,000, and so you think we got about 4 million babies born each year, and it's ubiquitous. Everybody in the pre-vaccine era would get measles because it was so contagious. So that'd be about 4 million cases every year, at least in the United States, with the birth cohort being born, that would get measles. And 1 in 1,000 of them would get encephalitis, brain infection. So 1 in 1,000, when you're talking 4 million people, that's 4,000 children. 4,000 children with encephalitis. Some would get this acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, which is a demyelinating disease, which can be very, very bad. There is a late effect from measles called SSPE, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. I've only seen one case of this. It was in Dallas back in the late 80s, a child who had naturally occurring measles from India, and it was bad. It's a degenerative disease, and they ultimately die in a very horrific way. That also is about 1 in 1,000 cases, 6.5 per 100,000 or 11 per 100,000 in that range. 20% or so of people are hospitalized, and the death rate is about 1 per 1,000 to 3 per 1,000. So somewhere between 4,000 and 12,000 deaths a year if we didn't have the measles vaccine from measles. So this is a big deal. There's a lot of badness from this, and we've had a lot of improvement over the last several years. And this slide shows globally what's happened. In 2000, with the far left part, is the circle that shows about 530 million or so cases, 530,000 cases of measles deaths in the world. And then that kind of held pretty much about steady, maybe a little bit down to about 480,000 deaths by 2003. But then with some worldwide global immunization programs, we really have seen a nice decline. You can see by 2010, we were about 139,000 deaths from measles. 139,000 deaths, but that's a whole lot better than 530,000 deaths every year in the world. From the figure, the visual image, 122,000, 330 deaths every. I've been 15 years. It's still a problem. It's still a problem. How about in the United States? Well, if you go back to the early 1960s, when we developed the measles vaccine, and Sam Katz, who was the chair of the Department of Pediatrics at Duke for many, many years, he was in Boston. And it's very, very active, very potent. So if you give the measles vaccine to a month-old, chances are the maternal antibody is still going to be there and will bind up the vaccine and make it less effective in that 6-month-old. Same is on true out to 12 months of age even as well. When you get beyond, while they're in 67, most type goal was set, and I can report that in 2000, endemic spread of measles was eliminated from the United States. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. It's not enough because those planes are flying in right now, and that's where the measles outbreak in Disneyland occurred, somebody coming in from the Philippines. But it's a big deal. This is a celebration, something we should be proud of. Now this shows a graph that I got from a friend at CDC who gave a talk at PAHO recently, and he shared this slide with me. And what you can see is the dotted line and the solid lines are different years, and there's some down to the bottom there's some shading, and the lowest shading is from the 2000s, and the shading a little bit above that is from the 1990s. So you can see that we're doing better until we get to 2008. In 2008, all of a sudden we started seeing some more measles, and then it kind of got back under control. But then look at 2014, which is the dotted line. And you can see that dotted green line, I should say. And you can see that we had a completely disproportionate number of measles cases in 2014. And then the solid purplish line that is truncated after March is where we were in those first 3 months of the 2015 cycle. And what really scared people is look how much higher that is than the 2014 year, and look what happened in 2014. So that's why we were so worried about this. And this is just a bar graph that shows the same sort of thing. These are imported cases. They might have local transmission thereafter, person-to-person transmission, but they come from outside. They don't start from inside the United States. If we look at this in 2014, about 670 cases from 28 states, 23 separate outbreaks, 60 different importations, 25 of which were from the Philippines. Others were from Europe and other parts of the world. Canada right now is having some outbreaks as well. Almost all of them, virtually all of them, were import associated. 86% were outbreak associated. Outbreak just meaning that you get enough people affected that you say, yeah, we got an outbreak going right here. And about 12%, which is similar to the 19% from the historical data, about 12% hospitalized as a consequence. Now, if you look at these cases in 2014 among U.S. residents, 3/4 were among unvaccinated persons. 16% additionally were in people with unknown vaccine status, and 9% were among vaccinated. I've got a slide in a few minutes that'll show you a hypothetical to give an understanding why some vaccinated people will get this. Vaccines are very, very, very good, but there will be some people that still will not have full, complete immunity following even 2 doses of vaccine. Therefore, it's possible to get measles when you're vaccinated. It's just a whole lot less likely. And then among the unvaccinated, 4 out of 5 were due to personal belief exemptions. Personal belief exemptions, which many states have now. Basically, it's I don't want to get it, so I don't have to. That's a personal belief exemption. 2015, and these are data through about a month ago now, 159 cases, 18 states, including D.C., or plus D.C., I should say. 10 different importations, all import associated, as I said, about 16% hospitalized. Of these, 44% were unvaccinated and 38% had unknown vaccination status. Remember, this is a rapidly developing scenario, so you guys know better than I do. It takes a while to kind of get an understanding of what the facts on the ground are, the fog of war, so to speak. And so we'll see where this shakes out over time. But only 18% were known to have been vaccinated. And then for those that are unvaccinated, about half were personal belief exemptions. And then 35% were too young to be vaccinated. These are the people that I would suggest we have a societal obligation, we have an ethical and moral obligation to protect these children. And we need to do the right thing to do that. So here's the hypothetical. 1,000 people exposed to measles. You get 90% vaccination coverage. So if you have 90% vaccination coverage, that means 900 are vaccinated and 100 are not vaccinated. And then if you have a vaccine, as would be the case with measles, that's 97% vaccine effective, then you're going to have 3% of the 900 that will not have protection because it's 97% effective, therefore 3% will not have that protection. So 3% of 900 is 27. On the right-hand side of the graph, of the 100 that get measles, the attack rate is 90%, so 90 will develop measles and will be unvaccinated. So that means that a total of 117, 27 plus 90, get measles out of this 1,000 exposed. And of those, so 27 divided by 117 is 23%. So 23% of the people getting measles in this hypothetical scenario would have been vaccinated. Most wouldn't, but some would. It's possible. The math shows that. And then this slide illustrates what happens if you have decreased efficacy and decreased coverage. I'm not going to spend time talking about that. We can circle back if there's comments or questions. So let's finish with just a couple of comments about the Disneyland outbreak. The difference this time is, at least from my standpoint, is parents are mad. This time it isn't just me getting mad or y'all getting mad. This time parents are mad. They realize that they're likewise parents. They're not pulling their weight, and that's not acceptable. And they're saying that's not acceptable, and they're saying it in social media, and they're saying it to people's faces, and that's good. That's different. That's a different dynamic than what we've had before. I don't know where it's going to go, but I personally welcome it. More people are engaged, and more people are realizing and advocating the benefits of vaccination. Social media is being used to apply peer pressure on those that are not being vaccinated. That's being done in a way that just simply hadn't been part of the calculus before. And as a consequence, as happens just a few blocks from here, when people start applying pressure, state legislatures respond. And so there are state lawmakers that are beginning to do things. 3 different states, Colorado, Montana, West Virginia, have enacted bills or rules that are favorable to vaccine administration. Some of them are reining in personal belief exemptions. Some have other impacts, but nevertheless they are helpful to the vaccine cause. And more importantly, many more states listed on this slide and the subsequent slide still have bills that are in their legislatures that may be enacted during the course of this legislative session that would, again, rein in personal belief exemptions and have other positive benefits. So I'll leave you with just a couple of points here. Vaccines save lives. And I guess my next point would be vaccines save lives. And vaccines save lives. Scientific evidence has proved that they're safe. IOM, other scientific organizations, all acknowledge that. Despite that, parents are more anxious than ever. What do? I think we can be passionate about this. I think we should be passionate. We should not be callous. I need to be less callous. I need to parents are trying to do the right thing. Almost all parents are trying to do the right thing. We just need to help them see what the right thing is. And we need people doing good science to show us how to do that. And I need to be open to that. I need to know. I need to learn how to do that better. The need to vaccinate each and every child has been proven with the schedule that we have now. Vaccines are safe. Vaccines save lives, and we need to do better with the messaging. Have a couple of slides I think that'll be available to you that show some references as well. With that, I'll wind this down. I'll turn it back over to Cindy, and we'll see where you might want to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kimberlin. That was a very inspirational message that you gave, and I really appreciate it. I do have a couple of things I want. I don't see any questions right now that are coming in, but I did have a question or a comment first. I've seen since the measles outbreak here in Alabama, several of our private religious schools that do not want to accept religious exemptions. And so actually there's 3 of them that I know of right now that keep asking me questions about here in Alabama. We do have a religious exemption, and we do expect both public and private schools to abide by those. They can only be given at the county health department, but they don't want to accept them, and they want to know what their liability is if they don't. So that was an interesting change that I had not seen before. The other area that you had mentioned, the hesitancy in the vaccine, the biggest one right now that we're CDC's asking us to look at is the HPV vaccine. And I wanted to get your opinion on, do you think it is all parent hesitancy, or is there some provider hesitancy to give that vaccine at 11 and 12 when it's recommended?
Yeah. Those are great comments and questions. I'm delighted to hear the first thing that you said, that some religious schools anyway recognize the risk that any exemption, any non-medical exemption, poses to the other children in their schools. I'm not going to have the answer for it. That's a legal answer, and I'm not a lawyer.
Right. No, more
but my understanding is that a private school has control over who attends the schools.
There could be some liability. Our legal has given them their opinion that they could have some liability if they don't accept that religious exemption that the law allows. But that's really a private school, and they have to make their own decisions and make their own risk and benefit.
But they can still choose not to. I mean, they don't have to accept every single student that applies to be in that school.
That's correct.
So I mean, I think they have some control over that.
Yeah,
that's how I look at it.
They do.
And they also have, if a child has a religious exemption, then and brings measles into the school, they have a risk as well for all the others in the school who might get sick from it.
That's correct.
So there's risk all the way around.
There
and
is.
I hope they do the right thing.
Yes.
Now, but I will say this, that I don't think the religious exemptions are really, they're not the main problem. There aren't that many. First of all, there's no mainstream religion, period, that actually says you shouldn't give vaccines. The Catholic Church has said to give vaccines. And there's something that
Yes.
I can get that for anybody. There's a great article that just was published a couple of months, maybe within the last year, that specifically reviews all world religions, and none of them have a religious reason to not give vaccines. So that's not.
And one of them was a Catholic school, so.
They can go to the Pope. The Pope will tell them it's okay to give the vaccine.
That's correct.
And it's available on the Catholic Church website.
Okay.
But the other thing I would say is that the personal belief exemptions. That's where I think there's more people that just say, well, I don't. My yoga instructor said I don't need to get it, so I'm not going to, or I don't think I want that, or whatever. And that's where I think the state legislatures are really beginning to consider. I mean, even California is considering reining in personal belief exemptions. California, and so if they can do it, so certainly we can. So I think that it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think that the entire political spectrum from left to right should be able to agree that personal responsibility is a good thing. I think this is a personal responsibility issue. I am responsible for my actions, make me responsible for other people. That's a personal responsibility that I take, and I take it willingly, and I hope other people will as well. Now, the HPV is a different matter. because there is some concern from parents, but there also are clear data that show that pediatricians and family practice docs they don't like talking about the HPV vaccine. And somehow during launch, it stopped being the cancer vaccine and it became the sex vaccine. And it should never have happened. Should never have happened. It was a real misstep by the company when they pushed that. They screwed up, and I think they know that now. We tried to tell them before, said don't do that, but they did.
Admit it.
So now what you have is or doctors who will say, now you're here and you're going to get your Tdap vaccine and you're going to get your HPV vaccine, and the HPV, that's for when your child starts to have sex, you want to make sure you give that before. You don't say, I'm going to give you the Tdap vaccine, and the reason the D is for diphtheria, and it can cause these pseudomembranes on the back of the throat that are grayish in color, and if you rip them off, you can suffocate on your own blood, because that's what diphtheria does, and the pertussis does it. You don't do all that. You say, I'm giving you your Tdap. So you say, I'm going to give you your HPV vaccine. There's no need to go into all that detail. If they want to talk about it, if they want to have questions, answer them. Absolutely. But you don't have to open up that door. And some of the research that the AAP is doing and CDC is doing is developing tools, online tools, that will teach pediatricians and family practice docs how to do a better job with that. How to simply just say, this is the vaccine these are the vaccines you need to get. I'll say, I have never met a teenager who got a shot and then got horny. It just doesn't happen. I don't think that's what an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old thinks. Hey, I've got free reign now. Let's go. Parents are they're going from A to Z when these kids are going from A to C or D maybe. This is not a concern, but we do have to do a better job of communicating to parents, either by not raising issues that are non-issues anyway, or by very directly answering questions. Whenever a question is asked, we need to answer it honestly and directly as to why it just isn't an issue.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a long ways to go. HPV, what is it, about a third that are getting 3 doses of girls, and half are getting 1 dose, and nationally. Even with that, we're seeing less CIN2.
Right.
Even with that. So, gosh, can you imagine? 4,000 women are alive January 1 who are going to be dead by December 31st from cervical cancer. 4,000 American women.
Right.
4,000. And if we could get HPV vaccine into the daughters and the sons, and those people could live,
yep,
let's do it.
Let's do it. I agree. I don't see any questions right now. What about from the studio audience? I think you did a wonderful job giving us information that we need to combat those parents with hesitancy issues, and sometimes providers. I will want to check and see if there's anyone on the line. No calls at this time. Well, Dr. Kimberlin, we really appreciate your time today and giving us this message. We really needed it. We are all in. This room is all in. And I hope the others that are viewing are all in. And we appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you letting me get on my soapbox. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.